Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. Appreciate the public for tuning in on their television or their radio or their computer, however they happen to be watching. I've got with me today, as usual, Dr. Alex Beu. He will be in just a moment. We also have State Fire Marshal Butch Browning, who will be here to answer any questions you might have that pertain to what he's been doing with Open Safely, and that'll become more apparent in just a moment what we're talking about. And I know that everybody is anxious about today's announcement, so I'll try to get to it. After discussing the data with public health experts in the Department of Health, with epidemiologists and the Resilient Louisiana Commission, and really reviewing the data that we've been accumulating over the last couple of weeks, we will be moving to phase 1 on Friday, May the 15th. That is this Friday. And so we will be lifting the stay-at-home order. The next proclamation will likely be issued on Thursday, be effective Friday. And we intend to leave it in place for 21 days, which I think is June the 5th. And so the next time that we anticipate having an announcement like today will be on Monday, June the 1st. And obviously we won't know what that announcement looks like until we get there and have the most recent data to look at. Obviously, like all decisions, this one involved a lot of time and work. And I want to thank the folks at the Department of Health, especially Dr. Beu and his team. We sure that we were following the CDC vetted plan that was issued by the White House Coronavirus Task Force and President Trump's phased approach to reopening the country. And I do believe that we are striking the right balance with this plan. And that balance obviously is between public health on the one hand and this public health emergency and re-engaging more of our economy, getting more of our businesses open, employers back to work, customers in our stores and restaurants, and so forth. Well, you're going to get some more data in just a moment that's broken down in different ways from Dr. Beu. But I can tell you that statewide we meet the threshold criteria established by the White House based on declining COVID-19-like illnesses being presented to the hospital emergency rooms, based on cases, and you'll see in just a moment that's particularly true with respect to cases as a percentage of tests administered, which is one of the White House criteria, and with respect to hospitalizations. In addition, as we outlined on Friday, and this too is part of the President's plan, we now have more testing capacity in state, and in fact in the first week of May, the federal government fully met their commitment to resourcing the state with collection kits that will allow us to get to 200,000 tests per week. And I'm sorry, per month. That would be a tall order per month, and so we feel much better about that as well. And that capacity that we have for testing and for contact tracing that will be in place by this Friday greatly exceeds that which was available to us a couple of weeks ago. The bottom line is the people of Louisiana have worked really hard since this public health emergency was first announced in order to slow the spread of COVID-19. And I am proud and I want to thank the people of Louisiana for doing that. They committed to and complied with the stay-at-home order, and had they not, we would not have seen the progress that we have been able to see. I also want to remind everybody that until Friday, the stay-home order is still in place. It constitutes essential infrastructure, and the full scope of those businesses that constitute essential infrastructure by CISA. They will continue to operate as they have without restrictions as to the number of persons that can be present and so forth, but they do have obligations, obviously, to employees and to customers with respect to public safety and social distancing, the use of PPE, and so on. And you've got a second category of non-essential businesses, back to those in just a moment, and then you've got a third category, and those that are closed businesses. Now, there will be fewer of those, but there will still be business types that will be closed in Louisiana. For example, during phase one, tattoo parlors, massage establishments, spas, amusement parks, children's museums, bars without LDH food permits, they will remain closed. In the second category, that's everything in between. So if you're not CISA, if you're not essential infrastructure under CISA and you're not one of the closed, you're in the middle, just like we had a middle before, but the middle is going to be larger because there will be more businesses that will be allowed to open, and they will include things like hair and nail salons, gyms and fitness centers. But there will be restrictions in place. Most notably, these businesses will operate with a maximum occupancy of 25% and must practice social distancing. And in fact, the 25%, that is so that we know that they can practice social distancing when they open. There should be enough square footage in the establishment so that individuals can stay 6 feet from one another. Further, employees interacting with or in close proximity to customers will have to wear a face mask or a face covering. As I mentioned, I expect that the proclamation that moves us into phase one and ends the stay-home order will last for 21 days through June the 5th. The next anticipated announcement will be on June the 1st. And I also want to note that as we made decisions about things like salons and gyms, we received input from the Resilient Louisiana Commission task forces, but also from the different trade associations about protective measures that they will put in place for the safety of their customers and their employees. And we fully expect that they will be cautious, as they have been all along, and that is why at this time I feel that it is safe to take this next step statewide. parish. But that 25% is designed to allow for the strict physical distancing, social distancing that is called for in the White House guidelines. So it wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't some number that was just picked out of the air. It corresponds to the square footage of the business and trying to make sure that people can engage in those businesses safely. I would point out a couple of things that on the Safer at Home slide for phase one that Dr. BU went through. The 25% limit on solo and non-contact sports doesn't apply to the team, so you don't have to field 25% of a baseball team, for example, but it does apply in the stands. And so obviously if you're outdoors and you can spread the spectators around the outfield and the sidelines and so forth, then that'll be fine. So with that, I'll take more questions. Yes, sir.
Governor, under what circumstances would it cause you to roll this back? I mean, you're obviously going to keep monitoring it. There's a chance you said spike COVID's still here. What would you have to see to roll back these?
Well, we're looking at the data every day when it comes in, and if we saw a spike in cases and that was more than you would expect to see just because you were increasing your testing capacity, that actually caused an increase in hospitalizations, then you've got to take a real serious look, and you got to try to figure out, is this something we can keep a lid on because of the additional testing capacity and the contact tracing capacity that we have. And we'll just be talking about that as we go with Dr. BU and his team, but we're also talking to the elected leaders from whichever region that might be taking place in. Yes, sir.
Hey, that's exactly the scenario in Monroe where you have cases increasing and hospitalizations increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is a question for Dr. B, but is that because of the testing results are just not coming in, that testing was increased there, or were they not really adhering in that area to social distance?
Well, I mean, I can't know for certain. I don't have any reason to think that the folks in Region 8 and in the Monroe area were less adherent to the stay-at-home than people elsewhere. You know, not every place is affected to the same degree and at the same time as other places, and thankfully that's so. So when we saw the huge increases in cases in New Orleans and in Jefferson Parish, that didn't play out everywhere, and sometimes you get them later. And I would submit to you, so when you we showed it as an increase because that's where it graphs out, but it's a net of 4. With respect to cases, we believe that the cases are showing up because the testing is increasing. And by the way, we're going to greatly increase our testing capacity in Northeast Louisiana over the coming couple of weeks, especially in those rural Delta parishes that we have over there. Yes, sir.
Going back to the spike in cases, you kind of talked about, depending on where they are, I know moving to this space and when you talked about not wanting to do a regional approach, or if some things maybe have to close down or restrictions go in place, depending on the spikes, could you be looking at a regional?
Yeah, I think it's entirely appropriate to consider, and of course we don't have it yet in front of us, and when we do, we'll look at it. If we ever have to slam on the brakes in terms of easing the restrictions, and it might be that we do that by region as opposed to the approach that we've been taking thus far, which is to do things at the statewide level. And again, I feel comfortable with the approach to do this at the statewide level, and I would tell you that if you pull out the phased guidance from the White House, from the CDC, that we do meet the requirements to go to phase 1. And there's no doubt, whether you look at the information in Globo or by region, we're much better off today than we were a couple of weeks ago. It's a conversation that I had actually on Saturday with the Vice President, and again today at a video telephone conference. But also I was able on Saturday to talk to Dr. Fauci and a separate conversation with Dr. Giroir. Admiral Giroir is over testing for the country, and he reaffirmed the absolute commitment that the federal government has to resource our testing plan to get to 200,000 tests per month for May and for June, and really going beyond that as well. All of that played into to the decision that we have. And I'll tell you, if you look at the data that Dr. Beal presented, and the overall trends are positive for the state of Louisiana. And I think it bears mentioning because it's, in some ways it seems like yesterday, and some ways it seems like a year ago. But it was just several weeks ago that we had the highest growth rate in cases in the country here, and really in the world, according to Dr. Wagner. We were number 2 in the U.S. in cases per capita. And clearly we had a hot spot that was unrivaled in the country, in Orleans and Jefferson Parish. Since April the 27th, the number of COVID patients in our hospitals is down by 373. The number of patients in our hospitals on ventilators with COVID down 105. And that said, I agree with Dr. Bu. We're not declaring victory. This is not mission accomplished. And we still have our eyes all over the state of Louisiana. We're going to be monitoring this very carefully. And we have particular interest in monitoring what's happening along the I-20 corridor between Shreveport and Bossier on the one hand, and Monroe on the other, in regions 7 and 8. That will be a particular focus, and I think Dr. B, you mentioned this, of our testing efforts across that I-20 corridor, so we can monitor it very closely, and our contact tracing efforts. It's important that people understand, though, that while we're easing restrictions, and I just mentioned it, it's not mission accomplished. We're not declaring victory. There's still COVID out there, just like there is all over the country. And we really need people to wear that mask when they're out in public and they're dealing with people who are not part of their immediate household. We need them keeping that physical, social distancing of 6 feet away from others. We need to make sure that they're washing their hands frequently, soap and water. And if there's one thing that's critically important, it is that literally, even though I don't have a stay home order in effect come Friday, people who are vulnerable, this really shouldn't make much difference to them at all. If you're 65 or older, if you've got these chronic comorbid conditions like hypertension, diabetes, kidney disease, heart disease, obesity, you really need to be extremely careful and stay home unless you're doing something that really is essential. And you know, I would just remind people that in addition to being safer at home, everybody still has their part to play. And I know this isn't easy, and I know it isn't comfortable wearing a mask, and I suspect as we get into June and July and August, and it's going to get really hot. But it is incredibly important for people to do that, because we don't want to have to go backwards. The worst thing we can do for our economy is to have starts and stops. But if we're going to open up more of our economy, get more people back to work, get more people in our stores and in our restaurants and so forth, we have to practice these things. Otherwise, we don't really have, and not just us in Louisiana, but this is key for the whole country. We don't have a whole lot of other tools in the toolbox in order to keep the case count down outside of the testing and the contact tracing. So we need people to do their part. And by the way, I think the people of Louisiana will do that. I'm reminded that of all the commandments that were given to us, you know, Luke chapter 10, other than the most important one, loving the Lord with all your heart and so forth, is loving your neighbor as yourself. One of the ways you can love your neighbor as yourself is to wear that mask and protect your neighbor from yourself, because there is still a substantial number of people out there with COVID who don't know they have it. They don't know they have it because they're asymptomatic. An asymptomatic person, by definition, feels like they're healthy. So you can't say, I'm not going to wear a mask because I feel good today. That really defeats the purpose. And so I'm asking people to wear those masks. Got time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Governor, can you talk more specifically about what criteria we're going to have to meet to enter phase 2 on 5th or whatever the date is, and also what phase 2 might look like? For instance, if bars reopen, is it going to look a lot like what the White House?
Yeah. Sam, I am not going to talk about what phase 2 may look like. It would be very consistent with what's in the White House plans. But there's only so much information we should put out on one day, and we're asking people to focus on phase 1 right now. And as we get closer to the decision on what phase 2, whether we're going to get to phase 2, then we'll start talking about phase 2. But the criteria remain the same. You just have to keep making the same progress. And when it comes to COVID-like illnesses being reported to the emergency rooms, cases, either as a raw number or as a percentage of tests, and hospitalization capacity. All of that has to be trending in a positive direction for 14 consecutive days. So the analysis looks very similar to what we just went through. And because you have to have 14 days worth of data to look at, it seems prudent to me to put this order in place for 21 days so we can collect the 14 days and then take a look at
I
it.
guess I'm just wondering how you might define a rebound, because the White House says you want no evidence of a rebound. I don't know if you have specific numbers you look at.
Well, first of all, we will continue, as we always have, with questions like that, to reach out to the CDC for their guidance and what it is that they might be looking for and how they would measure it and so forth. We will be very precise, but I can tell you this, everything that we're doing, we believe is safe so long as the people do what we're asking them to do with wearing the mask and keeping the 6 feet distance and washing their hands and staying home if they're sick and making sure that they understand that if they're vulnerable, that nothing really should change for them. You know, if people will do those things, if the employers will reopen their businesses and do so in a manner that's consistent with the guidance that they've gotten, we don't have to see a surge in cases at all. Now, I understand enough about human nature to know that not everybody's going to do what we're asking them to do. So the degree to which we're going to be successful will depend in large part on how many do it. We don't know, but I mean, every single time that I talk about this, I talk about the importance of doing these things that are CDC recommended, that are kind of common sense, and that make a big difference as to whether we keep those cases down. But you know, and Alex, I'll just ask you, in terms of what kind of the spikes we're expected to see because we go to phase 1, I don't know if you've received any information from CDC or any other modelers out there as to what that would look like. Yeah, come on.
Well, and I didn't necessarily mean from CDC. I mean, the state is running its own models. So I'm assuming you're building in the phase 1 expectations into the modeling to see what you are expecting in the launch.
So our models that we've been operating in the department have not modeled what does it look like to open and have contact tracing. We had worked with Johns Hopkins though to look at those scenarios, and what they showed was really it's dependent on how effective the contact tracing is. Some of that is on the department. Can we get enough contact tracers out to reach people? Is the testing adequate to meet that demand? But again, a large component of it is how do people. And that's why we keep emphasizing how important it is. There's only so much the state can do. We really need everybody to do staying at home, wearing a mask, and adhering to quarantining if you're asked to. Because that's how we're going to stop the spread, put ring fence around COVID cases as they develop, and keep them from spreading in our communities. So that's at least what I can say about the modeling.
Last question, everybody.
And I think, Melinda, to further answer your question, it is possible when you look at the cases that are developing, especially as a percentage of the test given, and at hospitalizations over time, you can predict the rate of transmission, the R naught, and kind of know where it is based on that. And so we know that as a state right now where we are, we know it, I say when we know it, the models tell us where we think we are at the state level and each region, and we're going to continue to look at those numbers as we move forward. And so when the R naught, if it should increase, we will take a look at that. and see how significantly increases and so forth. All right, I've got one more. Well, no, I'll go ahead and do two more. Leo and then Greg.
Okay, many parents are asking, when can daycare centers reopen?
Well, about 30% of the daycares never closed. And so they will be reopening with guidelines as they are able to do it, coming through the Department of Education in partnership with the Department of Health. But I want to say the last report I got on this from Interim Superintendent Beth Sino, about 35% had never closed. Now they may have taken in fewer children and focused on the children of healthcare workers and that sort of thing, but about 35% never closed. Yes, sir, Greg.
Governor, as you know, the REC accepted a forecast of $1 billion or more hole in the upcoming budget for the next year.
Yeah.
Are your expectations that the lawmakers pass a budget by June 1st? Or are you, there's some talk of them moving past that special session, see if there's a federal rescue? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think we're going to know anything more in the month of June than we're going to know in the month of May. And so I would hope that while we're here in a regular session, that we do the essential work that the legislature has to do, and part of that is passing a budget. And the number for next fiscal year, based on the LFO forecast, which is the one that was adopted, I think is $867 million. That is a very challenging number, even with the CARES Act money that we have, even with the rainy day funds that will be available next year, and even with the FMAP enhancement that the federal government has given, and that's the percentage of the Medicaid program that the federal government will pay. So there's a 6.2% kicker there. So even with all of those things, it becomes a very challenging budget. But there's no reason at this point to believe we're going to know more in June than we know now. And so I would encourage them to pass a budget. And no matter what we do preparing for next fiscal year, I think it's a pretty good bet that we would be coming back in October after an REC meeting to make adjustments to the budget for the remainder of the fiscal year. But we do need to adopt a budget so that come July 1st, we can keep the government in operation across the state of Louisiana. But no doubt it's a very challenging situation. And I do hope that something, either the Cassidy-Menendez bill or something like it will get passed. It's one of the things that we talked about today with the Vice President. We spent a lot of time on that. The governors all around the country, and he certainly expressed an openness to it, as did the Treasury Secretary, and thought that that might come into focus much more over the next couple of weeks. It would be very helpful if that happened. Look, thank y'all very much again for coming out. We're scheduled again for Wednesday. Is that right?
Yes, 2:30.
Wednesday at 2:30, right here. So appreciate y'all covering this, and I want to again tell the people of Louisiana how much I appreciate them for the patience that they've shown, for the compliance with the stay-at-home order, to put us in position where we can enter phase one, and I think do so safely. But whether we get through phase one safely really depends on continued compliance with all of these mitigation measures. We are not back to life as we knew it before COVID-19. There is a new normal in place, and everybody has a role to play, and I'm asking that you play that role. It's extremely important if we're going to be successful and not have to go back to more restrictions in place, which is the that we can do for our economy. It's the worst possible thing we can do for our and so forth. And so we are asking everybody to comply with the order. We're under the stay-at-home through the end of this current proclamation period, but on this Friday, May the 15th, we will move to phase one. Please make sure that if you've got questions that you get those questions answered this week on the 15th with the new order. God bless you so much.